Now let's look at some small but useful ideas which we can do using Java. The first thing is dealing with nulls. For example, if we want to check if strings are null, we would generally do if string name not equal to null and then do some things. But then in Java, if you see somebody's code, to keep checking the nulls, it becomes a little messy because every time you keep on checking certain things in different strings. To actually work against that, to not have that problem, Java introduced optionals. To show that, let me just create a new file for optionals, and I would just say this is optional use. Now in this, let's create a main method, and within this, for example, we have a user class, and let's have actually a string users, and this is going to be a new string, and let's actually have it as 5 users. So it's going to be an array of users. And now I actually want to access user2 dot char at 0. This means that, I want the first character of user2, and I just want to, do a sysout over here. So I'll just cut this from here, paste it, and I'll try to run this. Now when we run this, as you may expect that, we do have a null pointer exception. Why? Because user2 does not exist. User at the index 2 is null, and we are trying to actually find the first character of null, and that's what exactly this is saying. User2 is null, so you cannot invoke the char at method of null, and that's why you have this null pointer exception. Now to do that, what we would generally do is we would check, if user2 is not equal to null, then we would do something like this. Otherwise, we would just simply return. So when we run this, this program runs and terminates, and this is the kind of null check which we would want to do. Now imagine that we actually have to do this null check for each and every line, each and everything which we want to do, whether it's using this user array or whether it's using any other data type, which may be some method which would return, any other data type which is present maybe in some other class in its instance variable. You can have null in any data type, in any variable, right? And if you keep on checking this null, it would become really, really messy looking at the code. So for that, Java introduced the concept of optionals. So optional is a class in which you have different methods to deal with, different values. For example, you can over here create an optional of the type string. So you use these diamond operator, 2 angle brackets basically, and then you can actually create an empty optional. So you would write, let's say for example, empty equal to Optional.empty. This is actually going to create an empty optional for you, and it's going to return an empty optional instance. So no value is present for this particular optional, and we can use method isPresent for this. So if we do empty dot isPresent, and this is actually going to return to us if this optional is present or not. So let me just do a sysout and put this value within the sysout. And let me just comment this part out. So now when we try to run this, it says false. That means this particular value is not present, so it is empty. Look at this, that you can see that it does not throw a null pointer exception. That means it is empty, it's not present, but it is not null as well. Another thing which you can use using optional is, for example, you do have a string name, and here I'm just putting, name1, just for example. And for this, what we can do is we could have an optional string again and just call it, for example, name1 equal to, and then what we could do is use Optional.of. And what this would do is, let's say we pass, the same name over here, and let's try to print this now. Let's try to print name1. And let me just comment this part out. So when we run this, you have this particular optional with the value name1 in it. Now what this of is doing is basically creating a particular optional using the of method. And this would return an optional with the specified, non-null value which we are sending. So this is a non-null value. It's not null, right? Name1 string is not null. And we can create an optional using the of. But what if we actually want to send something which we don't know if it is null or non-null? So we know that, name is not null, so we are fine. What if we are wanting to create an optional with some null value? So for that, we may want to create using orNullable. So instead of this, what we could have is the exact same thing. Instead of using of, I would use .orNullable. Now when we use orNullable, we are free. If the name is null, then also there's going to be no issue. So for example, let me just pass null over here. And let's try to run this now. So you do have an empty optional. That means if you pass a value which is null, you would have an empty optional. Otherwise, you would have that particular element. So let me just pass name again over here and let me try to run this. And now you do have, optional name1 over here. So this is the way you can actually use an orNullable optional to be able to work, with null values. So what you could simply do is, instead of doing this particular not equal to null check, what you could do is basically just do name1 dot is present or is empty. If it is present, then do something. Otherwise, that it's not present, it is empty, then you would do something else. So let me just put that around if. So if this is present, then you do something else. Do something else. This is how you would generally work with optionals. You could also actually work with isEmpty. So I would just write or use isEmpty. And what isEmpty will do is do the exact opposite of isPresent. And this is, generally available only after Java 11. So you need, your version of Java to be more than 11. isEmpty is going to return false if there is a value present. Otherwise, it would return true. So that's, opposite of working with isPresent. Now, how do you actually get the value? So for example, if name1 is present, what I want to do is I want to get the value of name1. So I would call the get method and then, pass that in a string, value of optional. This is just a random name which I have given. And then, I would just do a sysout over here. And I would just want to print the value of optional. So let me just comment this out. So when I try to run this, now you can see that I do have the value of this particular optional, which is name1 printed over here. So it's a simple thing. And over here, what I could do is that, since we do not have any value, I would just, print null. This should be a string. Okay, so when we run this, we do get name1, but what if name1 was, null? Now when I print this, I do get null over here. So this is how you could, have your program work differently if you do have different values. If your name has some value, then it would work differently. If it is null, then it would work differently. Most importantly is that it would not throw a null pointer exception, and you have handled null pointer exception very well just by using the optional. You could also use something like orElse. So for example, you do have this, Optional.of.Nullable, and let's say for example your name may be null, so you want to add some default name. So what you would do is you would call the orElse, and in this you're going to give the value, some value. Let's say for example I am giving the value of null. So if your name does have something, it would be the name, but if it does not have anything, then it would be null. So now when we are actually trying to use this, we don't need to actually declare this name1 to be optional. We can simply change the type of name1 to be string, just because we are sure that, if it is not null, then we would have a string. Otherwise we would have, this value of null in this. And now since it is not optional, then we do not really need to use this particular isPresent. Or what we could simply do is we could simply use this name1 value, and if it is null, then it would simply print a null. Otherwise it would print the value of that particular optional. So let me comment this out, and then let me try to run this. So we do have name1 over here, but what if this thing was null? And when I save this, and print, then this would be printed as null. So this is how you could actually work with optionals, just by making the use of the various methods which it provides. You could simply have a lot of flexibility in your code. And lastly, there's a last method which I want to show is, instead of using orElse, you could also have used orElseGet. And it's similar to get, but obviously if you do not have anything over here, so since it is null, you could also do an orElseGet as well. So the syntax of that would be, inside orElseGet, what you could do is you could create a lambda, and you are going to learn what is lambda later on, but it's just a function which I would just create using these round brackets, a hyphen, an angle bracket like this, and just by making it an arrow, and then pass on any name which I want to pass, or null which I want to pass. So orElse has an easier syntax, that's why I'm showing you over here. But just in case you see somebody's code which is using orElseGet, and then within that it's actually passing a function sort of a thing, a method sort of a thing, just by having it in a very small syntax, two round brackets, one arrow symbol, and then the value of null. So this is also equally valid. So this is how you would use optional. Instead of every time checking if the user is null, you would probably want to create an optional using .of or .of.Nullable, and then check if it is present, and then get the value of it. Or you could also write orElse and get the value of it to be defaulted to something else if it is null. So this is how you would use optionals.